Hello everybody, and welcome to Introduction to Sociology. I'm your instructor, Ryan Mead. And in this first lecture, we're going to be looking at the building blocks of sociology, as well as answer the question, what is sociology? So the overview of this lecture is as follows. First, we're going to answer the question, what is sociology? Then answer the question, what are social categories? What are social institutions? And what is social structure? So what is sociology? According to the American Sociological Association, which is the largest association of sociologists throughout the world, sociology is defined as the following ways. The study of society, a social science involving the study of the social lives of people, groups, and society. The study of our behavior as social beings, the scientific study of social aggregations or groups, and an overarching unification of all studies of humankind, including history, psychology, and economics. So what you see here is sociology is extremely broad. First of all, what is society? Society is an extremely general term. We could look at society as being something as small as a very small community, your neighborhood, your, close friends and families. Or society could be something as large as something like a city like New York City, a country like the United States, or the entire world. Also, as we see here in these definitions, sociology is interdisciplinary, meaning it takes, as its basis of studies, themes, theories, theorists of other disciplines, such as history, psychology, and economics. So, sociologists are always looking to other academic disciplines to further their study of society. How I'm defining sociology in this course, though, is as follows. It's the study of social relationships between two or more people and how those relationships become solidified in the categories, institutions, and structures. So let's start with the first part of this definition. It's a social relationship, meaning social relationships are constantly changing. Think about your relationship that you have with your best friend. Some days you really, really like each other, and some days you're kind of annoyed with each other, and then you go back to really liking each other, meaning social relationships are constantly changing. However, social relationships do become solidified in the categories, institutions, and structures. So when a sociologist looks at a thing, they look, such as, let's say, a shirt, that becomes solidified not as a shirt, but a series of social relationships. Somebody had to grow the cotton that made this shirt. Somebody had to create the dyes that created this shirt. Somebody had to, create, mix that, or spin that cotton together into cloth and dye it. Somebody had to cut it. Somebody had to sew it. Somebody had to ship it to a department store. Somebody had to display that shirt at that department store. Somebody had to sell me this shirt. So all of these things that went into making this shirt are a social relationship. However, when looking at the shirt, we see it as a thing. It is a solidified social relationship. Now, I don't want to talk about shirts this whole class or this whole lecture. Instead, I want to look at how social relationships become solidified into categories, institutions, and structures. So, what is a social category? A social category refers to certain characteristics or traits held by a group of people who may or may not interact with one another. So some common social categories that sociologists look at are race, ethnicity, class, gender, age, and sexuality. So these characteristics or traits are considered socially significant by dominant groups within society. So we look for things in society that determine what somebody's race is or what somebody's ethnicity is. And we concentrate on those, signifiers more than other things. And we're going to get to that in the next slide. The significance and definition of these characteristics and traits are socially constructed. So what is a social construct? A social construct here is defined as an idea or practice that group that a group of people agree exists and is maintained over time by people taking its existence for granted. So, in terms of what race is, the definition of race was built by people or defined by people some time ago. And that definition has lived on and has transformed. But it's an idea, i.e. the conception of what somebody who is black versus what somebody white is. It's an idea that people just agree exists. And that idea is constantly maintained over time by groups of people. These characteristics and their social significance change through both time and space. So again, what we consider as somebody's race today, the 21st century, in the United States is much different from, what somebody was considered as somebody's race, back in, let's say, the 9th century in, let's say, South America. These characteristics and their social significance are used as the basis for social stratification or structural inequalities between groups within society. So these structural inequalities determine certain groups' access to material resources as well as social prestige. So what somebody considers your gender to be, not only is a social definition, meaning it's part of your identity, but that identity determines your access to resources as well as one's social prestige. So think about it. We look at inequalities between races, inequalities between ethnicities, inequalities between classes, genders, ages, and sexuality. So let's look at this table of different social categories, their definition, some socially significant signifiers. So what I mean here is what society or what people in society have considered important to the construction of that social category, as well as some common social categories. So first of all, let's look at race. The definition of race is the physical difference between groups. A socially significant signifier here is skin color. And this is, a physical difference that we base race on. It's usually skin color. Eye color is a physical difference between groups, but we don't determine someone's race based upon eye color. And some common social categories for race are white, black, American Indian, Asian, etc. Ethnicity is another social category, and the definition here is the shared culture of a group. And some socially significant signifiers here are one's language, one's ancestry, religion, styles of dress, food, etc. And here we have common social categories such as Irish Americans, Korean Americans, Hmong, etc. And when I say etc., I mean like thousands, tens of thousands of more ethnicities throughout the world. Class is defined as the socioeconomic status of a group. Some socially significant signifiers that make up what class somebody is one's wealth, one's income, one's social prestige, etc. And some common social categories that we think of in terms of class are somebody who's poor, wealthy, middle class, etc. Gender. Gender is the attitudes, behaviors, and norms that a social group associates with an individual's sex, or the biological difference between individuals. So socially significant signifiers, are physical and biological differences between one's gender, as well as cultural or learned differences. And because of this mixture between the physical and biological, as well as the cultural and the social, we have different common social categories such as male and female, which up till recently in the Western world has been looked on as the only two genders, but now we have a lot more that people who study gender are beginning to theorize, such as gender fluid, agender, polygender, trans woman, trans men, etc. Age is how long an individual has been alive, and we usually determine how long an individual has been alive in terms of years. This is how we measure this. And based upon how many years one has been alive, we usually put in specific categories and define those categories as infancy, childhood, teenager, adulthood, and old age. Now we need to be careful here. we have to think about, if we're defining somebody's age in terms of these categories, when does somebody stop being an infant and when does somebody move into being a childhood? We also have to understand that the concept of teenager is a relatively new concept, only coming into existence maybe about 100 years ago. Sexuality is defined as an individual's capacity for sexual feelings, and the socially significant signifiers here are romantic orientation and sexual orientation. And based upon one's romantic and sexual orientation, we determine common different social categories such as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, etc. So let's move on to the next question. What are social institutions? This refers to when a group of people come together for a common purpose that results in a complex, integrated set of social norms, roles, and organization designed for the preservation of that original purpose. So, there's a lot of complex, things in here, but let's, try to look at some examples to maybe shed some light at some of that complexity. So there's 5 major social institutions that sociologists study. The first is the economic institution. So a bunch of people come together, with a common purpose of organizing the economy of a society. And based upon that coming together in definitions, that results in a complex, integrated set of social norms about what the economy is and how it should operate, different roles for that economic institution and that organization. The next social institution is the political institution. Then we have the religious institution, the education institution, and the family institution. So things to keep in mind here. Each institution is historically and geographically specific, thus they are different through both time and space. Meaning what the dominant religious institution, let's say in New York State in the 21st century, is much different from New York State in the 17th century, which is much different from, let's say, Russia in the 13th century. So, major social institutions and their contents and their makeup change both through time and space. Each institution has both material and conceptual ideals, meaning we can look at the concepts that make up a social institution. Let's look at the political institution of democracy. There's conceptual ideas that make up democracy, and then there's the material consequences. Now, I shouldn't say consequences, the material constructs of what is a democratic institution. And we're going to get more into that in the next slide. Institutions are not only makers of meaning, but they're structured through the meaning given to it by social relationships. So, we might have an idea of what capitalism and capitalist institutions are, such as Wall Street or a bank, but the meaning, or what is Wall Street or a bank, that definition is usually given to us by so-called bank and or Wall Street. So, in other words, we might have ideas of how something is, but those ideas are projected back onto us through social institutions such as the educational institution or from that economic institution of Wall Street itself. Institutions legitimate their conceptual ideas as natural or true despite the fact that they have been socially constructed at certain times and in certain spaces. And this is where a lot of people get really, really cranky about sociology, is that sociology uncovers the social construction of social institutions. And right here, I'm going to say it right now, a lot of people get cranky when it's applied to religion. Why? Because religion is something that means a lot to a lot of people. So when people begin questioning, let's say, Christianity, people get really angry. So when I question Christianity, I am not saying there is not a God. But what I am saying is that the organization known as Christianity was built at a certain time by people. It has transformed over time by people, and it has a meaning that is constructed by people. And however, the way in which Christianity is organized by people over time and space it is done so in a way to promote to other people that it is natural or true. So this is one reason a lot of people get really, really cranky, because it calls into question the legitimacy of the institutions that people follow wholeheartedly. But again, I am not saying that there isn't a God. I am saying that, the conception of God has been transformed and structured within institutions at certain times and places. So let's look at some of this. Let's look at the institution of the economic institution. The definition here for economy is a system of production and exchange that provides for the material needs of individuals living in a given society. So conceptual examples here are things like capitalism, exchange, debt. These are all concepts that don't have, a material basis until we get into the material examples. So money defines exchange. A dollar bill signifies exchange. A dollar bill is only a piece of paper until we put that meaning on it. Credit cards and banks could work in signifying debt. They are material aspects that, work in promoting or work in bringing to life that concept of debt. The political institution is defined as the organization through which a government creates, enforces, and applies laws and policy while mediating conflict in order for the functioning of a society. So here we have things like democratic governments, socialist governments, authoritarian governments. Let's look at the material examples here. The Constitution, a piece of paper with symbols written on it, signify how that government is to be organized and operate. The White House in the United States, where the president lives and the executive branch is carried out, is another material example of something laid out in the concept of American democracy. Congress, senators, judges, these are all material representations of the concept of democracy, particularly American democracy. Religion is defined as a set of beliefs adhered to by members of a community, incorporating symbols regarding with a sense of awe or wonder together with ritual practices. Conceptual examples here are the concepts of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Material examples, the material manifestation of what Christianity is can be seen through a Christian church, can be seen through a priest, a pastor, or a minister, can be seen through the pews in that church, the religious artwork in that church, the materiality of a Bible. Same thing with mosques, same thing with temples. Educations are institutions used to help develop the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and understanding of society, and strive to make individual component members of those societies. So what is the purpose of education? And this is where the conceptualness comes through. Is education simply to gain skills to get jobs? Is education used for the betterment of society? Is, how should education be organized? Should there be mass, mandatory public schooling? Should there be private schooling allowed? Should education be used for the cultural competency of individuals? Or should education focus on multiculturalism? And these are all debates and concepts within the context of the educational institution. But we have material examples of education. We have brick and mortar schools. We have textbooks. We have teachers. We have this online space that we're communicating through right now for the purpose of education. And family, the definition of family is a group of individuals related to one another by blood ties, marriages, or adoption who form an economic and socializing unit. So what are some conceptual examples of education? Is family defined through the biological? Is it defined through whoever's living in the household? Is it defined? How is it influenced by religion and politics? Material examples of the family are dwelling. The number of spouses one has can define what type of family it is. The sex and gender of those spouses can also define what type of family that is. And finally, what is social structure? Social structure refers to the organized and underlying sets of social patterns of institutional relationships. Things to keep in mind when analyzing social structure. They are a product of social relationships and directly determine those social relationships. So kind of think back what we just talked about in terms of, categories and institutions. These are solidified social relationships that, in turn influence what our social relationship is now. They are not immediately visible to individual observers, but they're always present. And they impact all dimensions of human experience and society. So social structures make up, or integrate within them the social categories and the social institutions in a larger process of how the larger social structure, the underlying patterns of society operate. So examples of identifiable social structures: social groups. This is a collection of individuals who regularly interact with one another on the basis of shared expectations concerning behaviors and a shared sense of common identity. And that could be further broken down into different organizations. An organization is a social group or a large group of individuals with a set of authority relationships. So think about your job. Your job starts with your boss and then the workers underneath. Think about a classroom. It has the authority relationships between a teacher and students. Or we have networks. Networks are social groups that are structured through a set of informal and formal ties that link people together. Think about the social networks such as Facebook. It's just different ways that you're networking with people without authority-based relationships. So, social categories and social institutions, as noted, are constructed through and carried out within social structural patterns and relationships, or just social structures. So, a summary and conclusion here is that, in this lecture, we went over the following: the definition of sociology and its emphasis on social relationships, what social categories are and examples of them, what a social institution is and examples of them, and what a social structure is and examples of them. I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, make sure to either contact me or post a comment below. I look forward to seeing you next lecture. Goodbye.